Hey, what is up YouTube? It's your man Hypergon back again for another video. This time I'm going to be doing another deck profile on one of my personal favorite decks, and one I'm sure many of you will openly hate, but whatever, I still like the deck anyway. Infernities. Now, like I just said, I realize not a lot of people like this deck, and many would even consider it dead after the limiting of Infernity Archfiend, but I'm having to disagree. Is it as strong? No, not even close. But it doesn't mean it's dead. It would be dead if Archfiend was gone. They have not done that yet. Hoping they won't. But for the time being, we do still have our Archfiend, so the deck is still alive, and I'm here to prove it to you and show you exactly how mine works. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Alright, well, obviously, can't have a good Infernity deck without your one Infernity Archfiend. For those of you who have never had the displeasure of going up against an Infernity deck or are new to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, here's what this little guy does. As the centerpiece of the deck, whenever he is drawn and you have no cards in your hand otherwise, has to be during your draw phase, you can special summon him. When this card is special summoned, you can search your deck for one Infernity card, not monster, Infernity card, and add it from your deck to your hand. Now, the reason that's actually the reason that this guy got banned is because he's such an amazing search card, plus the synergy that he has with this deck is just insane. I'll hit a little bit more on that later. This is actually one of 3 cards in this archetype, specific to the archetype, that actually got hit by Konami, specifically being limited. Proof in and of itself that Konami also hates Infernities. But I digress on that. Next up, we have our 3 copies of Infernity Necromancer. I've seen a lot of builds where this guy is only at 2, but I still like him at 3 just because he's so essential for the way the deck works. He's kind of like the holy trinity of the Infernity monsters that, at least for the Synchro variant, you have to run. This is the Synchro variant, by the way, guys, just so you know. How he works is, when he is normal summoned, he's instantly changed into defense mode. And then once per turn, while you have no cards in your hand, you can special summon one Infernity monster from your graveyard, except him. So he's basically your monster reborn of the deck only for Infernity monsters, but he's, like I said, quintessential to getting a lot of your big plays off. The main monster you're usually going to be bringing back with him is either going to be Archfiend to get off your searches by a special summon, or, as I accidentally just slipped up with, Infernity Avenger, the one copy of that we run. This guy, he does have an effect, but most people don't actually use him for that. His effect is that when a monster, except for him, is destroyed by battle by an opponent's monster and sent to the graveyard, while he's in the graveyard and you have no cards in your hand, you can special summon him from your graveyard. And then his level is equal to the level of the destroyed monster. But again, almost no one uses him for that. He pretty much just exists as a level 1 tuner monster that can be brought out by Infernity Necromancer. Remember how I was saying there's like this holy trinity of Infernity card or Infernity monsters? This is it. This is your holy trinity of Infernity monsters. The way the main thing works is you're going to get out Archfiend through some special summoning effect. It used to be by drawing him, but that's hilariously ineffective now. Use his effect and see special summon, get Necromancer, Necromancer normal summons, and then brings back Infernity Avenger. You can now sync for any 8-star monster you want, and since he's a Dark Tuner, this also opens up a lot of other potential that most other decks don't have. Anyway, to round up the Infernity monster lineup, we have 1 copy of Infernity Mirage. This is another one I've seen played in different numbers. It's either usually a 1 or 2. Usually the Xyz variant tends to prefer 2, but I only really need 1 of this guy. The way he works is that he cannot be special summoned from the graveyard, and if you have no cards in your hand, you can tribute him in order to special summon 2 Infernity monsters from your graveyard. Now, while that is good, the catch to it is that it has to be 2 cards. So if you need to, like, for some reason just get back, like, an Archfiend to get off his search for something, you can't do that unless he's with another monster. So you have to bring back like Archfiend and Necromancer, but at that point it's not really as big of a deal. It's not like it's a difficult condition to meet, but the limitation is still there. So while it's selective, it can sometimes be a pain in the neck. Like I said, that's it for the Infernity lineup. Next up, I have 2 copies of Summoner Monk. This guy's pretty good because this deck runs a very heavy spell lineup. About half the deck is actually spell cards, and he makes for really good quick Xyz plays. Even though this is the Synchro variant, no Infernity deck can really survive without some Xyz options. Also a good way to special summon out your Infernity Avenger if you need it, or as I prefer to do, you can go for your 1 Armageddon Knight or one of the 2 Dark Grephers. These guys are just great for getting your cards into the graveyard that you need them. That's usually how the deck operates, is that it pulls stuff from the graveyard as opposed to like from the deck or the hand, since ideally you're not supposed to have a hand, so you have to get them from somewhere. For you, those of you guys who don't know, an Armageddon Knight is normal, just summoned. You can send a dark monster from your deck to your graveyard. Dark Grepher has the same effect, except that you have to discard a dark monster from your hand in order to activate that effect. You can also be special summoned by discarding a level 5 or higher dark monster from your hand, but this deck doesn't run anything that high, so you're never going to use that effect. Basically, they're just get things from your deck into the graveyard so you can access them later with Necromancer or something else. And to round out the monster lineup, we have 2 copies of Stygian Street Patrol. This guy's just pretty good for, if God forbid you have a hand, it consists of monsters. It's rare, but sometimes you will have like a starting hand of all monsters somehow. It's rare and it should never happen, but it does, unfortunately. You can use him to special summon 1 fiend monster from your hand by banishing him from your graveyard. Since all the Infernities are fiends, it makes it a lot easier, so you can bring out like your Infernity Archfiend, get off your search, you can bring out a Necromancer if you've already used your normal summon, or your Avenger, or whatever you have to do. Point is, he's a really good card. One of the things you're going to want to dump into the graveyard with like Grepher or Armageddon Knight or something. But that rounds off the monster count. I believe it's only 13. Most Infernity decks do like to keep the monster count kind of low, just because you don't want to have a hand. I've seen a lot of other ones that use like Dinotherium, but I'm not as big a fan of him just because he requires, basically when you do, your opponent can special summon a monster from their graveyard. So it's really only good turn 1, and I'm not as big a fan of that idea. But I digress. Moving on to, to the spell lineup, we have the second of the Infernity cards that is at 1. 1 copy of Infernity Launcher. Now, again, for those of you guys who do not know, there's a good reason that this card is banned. It was actually the first one of them that was banned. The way it works is, once per turn, you can send 1 Infernity monster from your hand to the graveyard. So it's good for emptying out your hand, but that's honestly the lesser of the 2 abilities that it has. The second one, and the reason why this card is considered so infamously good, is while you have no cards in your hand, you can send this card from the field to the graveyard to get up to 2 Infernity monsters from your graveyard and special summon them. So this is kind of like Infernity Mirage, only better because it doesn't have that limit of, having to be 2. You can just get 1 with it if you need it. Again, rarely going to happen where you only need to get 1, but it does happen, and it's just nice to have that. So for some more of the 1-ofs, we have 1 Soul Charge, because Soul Charge, 1 Foolish Burial, because we need to get things into the graveyard, 1 copy of 1 for 1, because we do have 2 valid targets for this, being Infernity Avenger and Infernity Mirage, so it's a good way to just pull them out from the hand or deck if you need to. Plus, it has the discard effect of sending a monster from your hand to the grave, so it helps keep your hand dry if you need it. It's not the best card in the deck. It'd probably be one of the ones I'd want to replace if I could find a better card for it, but it works well for me. And then to round off the 1-ofs, I have 1 Book of Moon, because it's great. I also have 2 copies of Dark Hole, thanks to the new ban list. Not what I want in the deck, though. These are just there because I need something. If I could have my way, I would have these be a Raigeki and a Snatch Steal, respectively. But unfortunately, Raigekis are a bit pricey, and I have yet to get my hands on some Snatch Steals. I'm working on that part, though, but for now, the 2 Dark Holes do their job. You know, it's good to have some board wipes if you need it. Just for those OTKs that this deck is so infamously known for. And I also carry 2 copies of MST. I don't think the copy of 3 most people seem to run are necessary. 2 seems to be doing fine, because I don't want to like draw into a hand of 3 MSTs and then be able to do nothing. It's more just I need to get rid of some back row to ensure my safety, and that's what it does. Also have 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army to search out Armageddon Knight or Dark Grepher, and 2 copies of Instant Fusion. This card's pretty good just because it helps sort of increase the monster lineup without actually increasing the monster lineup. You can use it for discard with Summoner Monk, which is pretty cool, but more than anything, it's just a free, well, not free, it costs 1,000 life points, but it's a special summon that you can use to help get out like a Synchro or an Xyz play, just in case you're missing some amount of levels or whatever you have to do. If you have just like a Dark Grepher and you need to go into like a 101 or a Lavalval Chain or something, just use it, grab the level 4 fusion monster of your choice, and there you go. Or if you happen to have just like a Necromancer and Avenger and you want to make an 8-star Synchro but you don't quite have access to it, or you have the Avenger and the Archfiend but not level 3, you can just... It's a pretty good card. It helps kind of fill in the gaps of the deck. Also, kind of a weird choice here. I run 2 Forbidden Chalice. Of the Forbidden cards, this is kind of iffy one of them, since the other 2 decrease the target monster's attack and this one increases it. But what it does is it targets one face-up monster on the field. It gains 400 attack, but its effects are negated. So I could run Breakthrough Skill instead, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like for the way this deck works, it's a little bit more effective with this, because I'm not usually going to be using effects during the battle phase, so if I need that 400 boost, I'm golden. I can use it for that, and with how most cards in the deck work, I'm not really too scared if my opponent's monster gains plus 400 as long as their effects are negated, because I can usually just kill it the following turn anyway. So, most decks, I would not recommend this. I would recommend like a Breakthrough Skill or something, but for how this deck works, it does its job. And to round off the spell lineup is actually... It's an interesting tech. I can't claim credit for this. I actually got this from another Infernity deck profile that I saw, but I really like the idea of it. I tested it out and it's been working out really well for me. 2 copies of Wonder Balloons. I do not remember who I saw this from, so I cannot give adequate credit, but this isn't my idea. This was someone else. They're genius for it. For those of you who don't know what Wonder Balloons is, the way it works is that once per turn, you can send any number of cards from your hand to the graveyard to place a balloon counter on it equal to the number of cards you sent. All monsters your opponent controls will lose 300 attack for each balloon counter on this card. So this card essentially serves to do 2 things. The first is that it will help keep your hand nice and dry. So keeps cards out of your hand, puts them in the graveyard where you like it. It's a great way of getting rid of like excess monsters if you have too many to deal with. And the second thing that it does is it nerfs your monsters. This is basically Burden of the Mighty on steroids, and I love it. It's been working surprisingly well for me. For you Infernity players out there, if you haven't tried this, try it. It's hilariously effective in this deck. But anyway, that rounds off the spell lineup. I don't remember how many spells I have. I think it was like 16, 20, something like that. I don't remember. Anyway, finishing off the spells, and the third and final card that Konami decided was just too good for the Infernity archetype is 1 copy of Infernity Barrier. I'm sure a lot of people would agree that this card deserved to be banned, and I'm one of them. This card is hilariously good. For those of you who don't know, when your opponent activates a spell trap card or monster effect while you control a face-up attack position Infernity monster and have no cards in your hand, negate the activation and destroy the card. Now, I know some of you are thinking you haven't faced an Infernity deck. Well, that's a lot of conditions you gotta meet. I mean, an attack position Infernity monster and no hands? Trust me, if you've played this deck, that is child's play. Or at least it was. Admittedly, this is if any of the 3 Infernity cards that have been limited, if any of them were to come back at all, this is the one I could see coming back. For one reason and one reason only. Archfiend is at 1. The reason that this card was originally banned is because, or not banned, limited, is because when it was in its heyday, this was at 3 and Archfiend was at 3. So that, and Archfiend is usually the card you're going to have with this. Because if you recall, the other Infernity monsters I showed you all had like 0 attack. Actually, no, they did all have 0 attack. So you're not going to have them in attack mode. Infernity Archfiend, however, has 1800 attack. You're keeping him in attack mode. And with this card out, and any good Infernity player knows it's easy in this deck to keep your hand nice and dry, you had to get past 3 negates of any card effect you tried to do. It was insane. There's only one Infernity Archfiend now, and he's usually not going to be on the field that long because you're going to be using him to get your Synchro plays or your Xyz plays off. So, because Archfiend is at 1, I could see this maybe coming back to 2. Again, I'm by no means saying a prediction. I'm sure plenty of people out there are going to disagree with me on that, and I can't blame you. But just given how the deck is now, this is not the threat it once was. So I could see it coming back a little bit. Plus, as I'm sure a lot of people noticed, once this did go to 1, it did not slow down Infernities. If anything, it forced us to be a little bit more dynamic and think about how to play the deck. This isn't even really necessary anymore. It's more just kind of trolly, which makes sense given how the deck works. Anyway, moving on. Have 2 copies of Infernity Break. This is a pretty fun little card. You can only activate this card when you have no card in your hand. Select 1 Infernity card in your graveyard and banish it to destroy 1 card on the field. It does target, unfortunately, but it's pretty easy to chain multiples of it. I used to run 3, but I just kind of had to sacrifice it in order to make room for other cards to help keep the deck alive. But the good thing about it is that it actually says you have to banish 1 Infernity card, not a monster. If it was an Infernity monster, this card would not be nearly as good. But because of that, if you have if you've already used your Launcher or you've already used your Infernity Barrier, you can just use that as your banished target, and then once you've activated 1 Infernity Break, you can just banish that for the other one. Or if you have 3, you can do that, you'll always be able to banish the other breaks that you've already used. So it's pretty good just getting rid of some unnecessary cards. Anyway, next up I have 2 copies of Mirror Force. Just a good little thing to help prevent attacks. In the same vein, I also have 2 copies of Dimensional Prison. I know people prefer this over Mirror Force nowadays, but the way I see it, why not both? They both do a good job. This can be used for monsters you don't necessarily be destroyed, and Mirror Force can help prevent OTKs. And finally, for the 1-of traps, I have 1 Compulse, 1 Bottomless, 1 Torrential Tribute, and 1 Solemn Warning. That pretty much rounds it out for the trap lineup in the main deck. I don't really feel the need to explain those last 4. Pretty much staples in every deck. Now on to the fun part, the extra deck. Okay, so first off, as I mentioned for those instant fusions, I have a couple targets for them. First one is Charubin the Fire Knight, and then Darkfire Dragon. More commonly than Darkfire Dragon, most people tend to run a Chemion Wizard just because he is a level 4 Dark Monster with 1300 attack instead of 1500, so he can't be Bottomless when he's summoned. But he's also a little bit more expensive, and quite frankly, if I'm going to get Bottomless, then even if I do bring out a Darkfire Dragon, then I'd rather have that get Bottomless than whatever I was going to use to make him. Use him to make. Like if I was going to use him with, say, Dark Grepher or something in order to make like a Volval Chain, then even if that doesn't get Bottomless, the Volval Chain will. So the way I see it, it doesn't really matter, just as long as it's a level 4 monster that I can bring out with it. And Charubin Knight, Charubin the Fire Knight, pretty much same thing, just level 3, just gives you a little bit more diversity. Next up, I have 1 copy of Armory Arm, just in case I can pull out like a Necromancer and an Avenger, just to kind of help power up one of my other big monsters. Don't really use that often, but it's just kind of fun to have. 1 Herald of the Arclight, just to help slow my opponent down till I can set up and really destroy them. Um, one Armades, because who needs card effects during battle phase. One Stygian Sergeants. This is an interesting card that's pretty much only doable in a few decks, and Infernity happens to be one of them. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, it gains 800 attack and can attack again. So, and it's not just limited to like doing that once. You could clear your entire opponent's field if they had like 5 monsters, as long as you can keep gaining successful attacks. So this is a really useful card, and 22 is not a bad starting point either, especially considering he gains 800 in each one. So first one's 22, second one's 3,000, then 38, and so forth. It's a pretty good card, pretty easy to get out with any level 4 plus an Avenger, so I like him. Next up we have 2 copies of Hundred Eyes Dragon, just because he's pretty fun for the loops. I heard one person say that the loop is done by, for those of you who don't know how he works, he uses a Dark Tuner, and he can banish a level 6 or lower Dark effect monster from your graveyard in order to gain its effect until the end phase. A lot of people have been saying that you're supposed to banish Mirage in order to get his effect off properly, but Mirage requires he be tributed, so I think I may have heard that wrong from someone. I've always just banished one of my Necromancers, since I have 3 of them, and I'll probably have a Stygian Sergeants in the graveyard, so I can just banish him to bring out Necromancer, and it works just fine for me. Again, I could be wrong. If someone does understand how giving him Mirage's effect is better, please explain it to me in the comments below, because I was confused when I heard that. Next up we have 2 copies of Void Ogre Dragon. Not technically an Infernity monster, but it might as well be. It also requires 1 Dark Tuner, and once per turn, during either player's turn, when an opponent activates a spell trap card and you have no cards in your hand, negate. He's basically a bigger Shien, because he has the 3,000 attack and 3,000 defense. So he's either a wall or a beater, whatever you need him to be, and regardless, he can still negate once per turn. If you can get both of them out, that's 2 negates per turn, and that's going to make stuff like Infernity Barrier look like child's play. Next up, we have 1 Beals, because we have Dark Tuners, might as well take advantage of it, and this is just a hilarious card to use. Can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, and if he would ever take damage, he gains the damage that you've taken into his attack, so he can only get bigger, and getting rid of him is exceedingly difficult, and a giant pain in the neck. Fun card to use. And to round off the synchros, 1 copy of Infernity Doom Dragon. You could argue that this is another target for Infernity Barrier, but of all the 8-star synchros I just showed you, this is the one you will go into the least. It's not like he's a bad card, he's just not as good as like Beals or Void Ogre for what the deck wants to do. Again, requires a Dark Tuner monster. Pretty much all your good synchros will. Once per turn, if you have no cards in your hand, you can select 1 monster your opponent controls and destroy the monster. Then you will inflict damage to your opponent equal to half of the attack of that monster. However, this card cannot attack the turn you use that effect. So it's not a bad one. It can help get rid of problem monsters, like pretty much anything higher than 1500 you're going to want to use the effect for, because you'll probably get off more damage that way. Or 2000 rather, I'm sorry. But either way, it's compared to like Void Ogre and stuff, it's just not as good. Again, you can use him in combination with Barrier or whatnot, but normally this isn't the card you're going to want to go into. And finally, for the Xyz lineup, not very big. 1 Livia, the Sea Dragon, just because you do banish in this deck, so you may want to get some of that stuff back. 1 Castel to help deal with problem monsters, and as I've referenced several times in this video already, 1 Lavalval Chain. I only recently got this card, and I am so happy I did. This is the card that helps keep the deck alive, because what you're going to do with him, those of you who don't know, he's a generic rank 4, so any level 2s, or any 2 level 4s, sorry. You can detach, and then you can either send a card from your deck to the graveyard, or choose a monster from your deck and put it on top of your deck. So, the most common ability you're actually going to use, unlike most decks which will typically use the from deck to grave effect, you're actually going to be using the second one where you put a card on top of your deck. What card? Silly children, why would you even ask? Infernity Archfiend, of course. Remember how I told you that when he is drawn and you have no cards in your hand, how you can special summon him, get off the search with that? That's what he's for. He helps get off all those big plays. The monster you usually... the way I usually do it is I'll have like a Summoner Monk, I'll discard a spell in order to bring out a Dark Grepher, use Dark Grepher's effect to discard some monster in my hand, or I'll get Armageddon Knight if I don't have a spare monster in my hand at that point. Put Avenger in the graveyard, then overlay into this guy, uses his effect to put Infernity Archfiend on top of the deck. So that next turn I'll draw him, special summon, and then I can search out Necromancer, use him for my normal summon, get back Avenger, and then start my loops. This is really the card that helps keep the deck alive. Without this, Infernities would truly be dead. I would not be able to conceive a way to keep them around. This is Infernity's saving grace, so hopefully nothing ever happens to him. But that's the deck lineup. Tell me what you guys think. There a card I could be using a bit better. You guys have any comments on it? Please don't say Vanity's Emptiness. I hate that card. I'm not putting it in no matter what you guys say. But if you have anything else, just, let me know in the comments down below. Of course, don't forget to also like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.